were the white boys permitted to talk to the colored boys?
I don't know of any rule against it at this time. I mean, I don't remember anything.
Were white boys ever punished for talking to colored boys?
I don't know about that. I didn't punish one for that. Or Mr. Haddon.
During your period with the school, what I'd like you to do is in your mind, go through an organizational chart. Do you know what an organizational chart is? A picture that shows the different levels of responsibility. I can see you're confused. Let me start with this. During the time that you were there, who was the boss? Who was in charge?
Who was in charge?
Yes,
the
sir.
superintendent and the director.
And who were the superintendents when you were there?
The first superintendent was Miller Davidson.
And how long was he superintendent?
He became superintendent in 1930.
And he was there when you arrived in 1943?
Yes.
And who replaced him?
George McCrory, I believe.
And what years would he have been there?
He didn't live too long after becoming a superintendent. And Mr. Dozier, he came out of the service. He had worked at the school before going into the service. And when he came out of the service, he came back to the school and was director for a short length of time until they appointed him superintendent in McCrory's place after he passed.
Okay. So the superintendent would be the highest level?
Yes.
And under the superintendent was the director?
Yes.
He would be the next in command?
Who would be the next?
He would be the director would be the second in command?
Yes.
And how many directors were there?
One.
One. Okay.
On each side.
And then under the director, who would be next?
Who would be under the director?
Yes.
The supervisor.
And initially there was one supervisor, and then there came to be a time when there was more than one, is that correct?
Yes.
And how many supervisors were there when you left?
It was two of us.
And who was the other?
Bud White.
And next under supervisor, what would the next highest?
House leaders.
House leaders? And how many house leaders were there? One for every house?
Well, you had the regular house parent, and then you'd have a reliever house parent. So at one time, when the house parent who worked, say from the crew, come in to give the other full-time house parent time off. Of course, that would be a school teacher or it could be a crew instructor.
We went through the superintendents from Miller Davidson to George McCrory to Mr. Dozier. Who followed Mr. Dozier, do you know?
Let me think just a minute. Mr. Dozier. Maybe Dave Walters. I'm not sure.
And during the time that you were there, who were the directors?
During the time I was there?
Yes, sir.
Mr. John E. Marianna, who is deceased at this time. He was from Westerly, Rhode Island.
Morano?
M-U-R-A-N-O.
Morano, okay. And who replaced Mr. Morano?
Let's see, I believe by the name of Howard. I don't remember his first name. We always addressed the staff Mr. and Mrs., you know, and today I can't tell you. I remember some of the last name, but the first name I don't. But
remember anybody after Mr. Howard?
Let's see. There's a possibility that Mr. Hatton might have been transferred at that time from the color department.
And who was Mr. Hatton?
He was the director.
Was he director on the white side or
He
the colored
was
side?
director on the colored side and was transferred over.
After the segregation ended, he became a director on the main campus. Is that correct?
Yes, and I don't remember that well anymore, but there was a time when he left as director and went into the superintendent's office, and I don't know what his position might have been then.
Is Mr. Hatton black or white?
White.
And he had been working on the colored side,
Yes.
and then he eventually became perhaps a superintendent on the white side. Is that correct?
Director.
Director. All right. We're going to have to take a break in about 5 minutes. Let me just start into this subject, and we're going to have to stop in just a moment.
Okay.
Let's talk about the records that were kept at the school while you were there. Before a boy arrived, would you receive a package of records about the boy?
I don't know. I didn't work in the superintendent's office, but they would have gotten it before anybody else.
Okay. Would you know when boys were going to be coming to the school?
I'm sure there was communication but from the judge that would be sending the boys up to the superintendent.
Do you know if they kept medical records about the boys?
Oh, I had to do that.
Okay. Did they have to go for regular vaccinations and physicals and things like that?
New boys came in there the first day they got to the school. They were the program was explained to them, and they were given a physical and a test, school test, and they determined what jobs were available to assign the new boys.
Mr. Tidwell, we have to take just a minute's break for her to change the videotape, so let's just hold off for just a moment.
On record. We're back on the record with
Mr. Tidwell, we're back on the record. We were talking about record keeping, or records that may have been kept at the school while you were there. Did they keep classroom attendance records?
Classroom?
Yes, sir.
I'm sure they would have.
Did the boys get report cards?
No, not to my knowledge.
Did they take standardized testing when they were there?
They took that when they first got in, was when they came to the school.
When they left the school, were there any records that were created at the end of their stay at the school?
Was a record of,
When somebody left, were there discharge papers that were prepared?
I'm not,
You don't know?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not familiar with any discharge papers.
Were the boys required to undergo any psychological or psychiatric evaluations while they were there?
I'm pretty sure that was done at the diagnostic center.
And where was the diagnostic center?
At the time, it was across from the old academic department. That was just across the street. The building was next to a cottage, Wilson Cottage.
And other than perhaps diagnostic testing, testing for standardized testing like other kids were doing in school, what other things were conducted at the diagnostic center, if you know?
I really can't tell you. Mr. Harris was in charge of that department.
And who was Mr. Harris?
He's deceased, but he was a black man, and I'm not sure if he retired at the school or not, or his health was bad, and I don't know if he, I think he passed away during the time he was working, because his